Welcome once again to Flashpoints. I'm Bob Orr. Joining me, Juan Zarate, our national security analyst. Juan, good to see you.
Bob, great to see you.
So an extraordinary thing happens in Manhattan. Didn't get a lot of attention because of all the focus on other things like the plane disappearance and everything. But Abu Ghaith, one of the spokespeople, or the alleged spokesman for Bin Laden, took the stand in court in New York.
Yeah, remarkable. And it's remarkable, actually. You and I focus on this and a few others, but this is a big deal. You have somebody who sat at the right hand of Osama Bin Laden, who is a part of the al-Qaeda inner circle, to include post 9/11, where he was held in Iran, keep in mind, in court in Manhattan, taking the stand. And what's interesting about that, Bob, is he reveals, at least from his perspective, you know, you have to take it with a grain of salt, what his role was in the group. As a chief spokesman, he tries to downplay any operational role, obviously. That's part of the defense. But also gives a view and a vision of how the camps were working and how the inner workings of al-Qaeda were operating. That's fascinating in the context of an open court hearing, and is a real sort of monumental moment in the post 9/11 hearings that we've had on al-Qaeda itself.
He sat there and answered the questions. He didn't seem to duck the questions. Yeah. He tells an amazing story after 9/11 that he's summoned by Bin Laden to some cave somewhere deep in Afghanistan, where Bin Laden tells him, "We did this."
That's right.
So he validates much of what we already knew. But what's the significance of having an al-Qaeda central figure on the stand in a civilian court?
Well, part of it is getting a more complete sort of open source picture of what's happening in al-Qaeda. The other thing is trying to understand the way he's portraying himself, especially so many years after the events of 9/11 and being in some ways detached from Bin Laden. And the interesting thing there, and it dovetails with his defense, his legal defense, he's trying to portray himself as simply a spokesman for Muslim grievances, the assault and the attacks on Muslim communities around the world that he claims to be a voice for, and that al-Qaeda in some ways gave him a venue and a way of pronouncing that publicly. That his role really for Bin Laden and al-Qaeda was not to radicalize individuals or to bring people into the camp.
He was a PR guy.
He was a PR guy, and
propagandist.
And it matched with his broader global view, and so be it. That's what he did. That's an interesting defense, one that we knew that the defense was presenting around him, but to hear it from his voice is a really interesting reflection of that evolution.
As we wrap this up, I have to ask you this question. So the United States thinks this is a serious terrorist, that he was a central player in al-Qaeda. He's being tried in court in New York. Is this a roll of the dice by the government, in your opinion? I mean, what happens, for example, if the court buys this and says, you know what, we don't think this guy was really a planner?
I think it is a roll of the dice. And we've talked about this in the context of other trials that have been brought in Article III courts, like Ghaith, the East African al-Qaeda member, who was acquitted on all but one charge. Remember?
Right.
So that we were one charge away from an acquittal of a known al-Qaeda operative. The question fundamentally, and this goes to the heart of the post 9/11 detention system, what happens if you put somebody into a trial, military or civilian, and they're acquitted? And if you put somebody into that system, you have to assume the rules of evidence, the assumptions of that system, and frankly, I think you have to respect the consequences. And that means even if he's acquitted, you may have to release him. If that's the case, we're rolling the dice, because that would put the administration in an incredibly uncomfortable position. Do you let somebody go if they're acquitted? If this guy is found by the jury to have simply been a spokesman, First Amendment rights, he can say what he wants. He wasn't operational. He didn't pre-plan anything. He wasn't part of a conspiracy. If they conclude that, one juror concludes that, and they have a hung jury or the jury acquits, you've got a serious policy question on your hands.
Well, and the policy question might be, he's acquitted, does he walk free, or do you grab him and declare him an enemy combatant? I mean, it would call into question the whole system.
Well, it would call into question the whole sense of rule of law, and it would call into question this administration's call for the use of trials to hold people accountable. And if they're going to be held accountable and they're acquitted, and you don't let them go under the laws of war, which I think would be legitimate, but if you do it in that stage and in that context, wow, that is a real crisis of legitimacy of the American legal system, and this administration would have to explain themselves. And so I'm hoping we're not going to get there, but that's a real risk.
We're in the realm of the hypothetical, but we'll have to keep an eye on this.
That's right.
Because it's very interesting. Juan, thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
And thanks to you for watching Flashpoints. I'm Bob Orr. We'll see you next time.